You didn't need it anyway. My father's voice came through my phone's speaker, disturbingly casual, as if he hadn't just admitted to stealing my entire college fund. As if what he'd done was nothing more than an inconvenient mishap, rather than a complete betrayal. Besides, what's done is done, no point in getting upset about it now. I stood frozen in my tiny London apartment, my phone pressed against my ear, listening as my father nonchalantly explained why he had drained the account meant to fund my final year of college. The fund I had painstakingly built through scholarships, part-time jobs, and careful savings since high school. How much is left? I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady even as my hands trembled. Left? None of it's left, honey, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I had some debts to clear up, but don't worry. You're smart. You'll figure something out. Figure something out. As if I had a choice. As if he hadn't just stolen 4 years of my hard work in the span of a month while I was thousands of miles away, powerless to stop him. He had remained a co-signer on the account I had opened at 17, a technicality I had naively assumed wouldn't matter, a mistake that had just cost me everything. I see, I said quietly. Well, good luck with that. That's my girl, he replied, mistaking my eerie calm for acceptance. Always practical, just like your old dad. Listen, I've got to run, meeting some friends for drinks. We'll talk soon. Meeting friends for drinks. With my money, with my future. I sank into the chair at my small desk, staring blankly out at the London street below. I had fallen in love with this city during my semester abroad, but now, in just 3 months, I would have to leave. 3 months to figure out how to salvage my senior year, after my own father had pulled the rug out from under me. My phone buzzed again. A text from him this time. Don't mention this to your mom or grandmother. No need to worry them. Of course, he didn't want them to know. Just like he hadn't wanted them to know about his gambling debts, his failed business ventures, his habit of borrowing money he never intended to repay. My hands clenched into fists. Fine, if he thought I would just roll over and accept this, he didn't know me at all. I opened my laptop and began making a list. First, documentation. Bank statements showing the account's history, proof of my deposits, records of the scholarships I had earned. Then, research. Legal resources, financial aid options, potential part-time jobs. My father had always underestimated me, treating me as though I were just another backup plan, another safety net for him to exploit. Good thing you're pretty, he would say whenever I brought home straight A's, as if my academic achievements were nothing more than a side note. You can always marry rich if college doesn't work out. But I hadn't worked this hard, fought this hard, to let him derail my future. He thought I was being practical when I calmly accepted his theft. He had no idea that practical was exactly what he should fear. Over the next week, I pieced together the full extent of his betrayal. The account had held just over $42,000, money I had earned through academic scholarships, grueling summer jobs, and ruthless budgeting. He had withdrawn it all in a series of transfers over the past month, each transaction just small enough to avoid raising immediate red flags. When my roommate, Emma, found me surrounded by a sea of bank statements one evening, she snatched one up, her eyes scanning the numbers before widening in shock. "Your father did what?" she exclaimed. I let out a slow breath. Legally, he had every right to access it. His name was still on the account. "But you never thought he'd actually do it," she finished for me, her voice laced with anger. "Sophia, this is theft." I should have known better. Should have remembered the way he had borrowed my birthday money throughout my childhood, always promising to pay it back but never doing so. Should have remembered how he had tried to convince me to take out extra student loans in my name, swearing he would help me repay them. My phone buzzed again, another text from him. "Don't stress about the money, you worry too much. Maybe this is a sign you should take a break from school. I know some guys who could get you a modeling job. Better money than that degree." Each message revealed more about how little he valued my education, my independence, my future. To him, I wasn't a daughter. I was just another resource, another safety net. But he was about to find out that I wasn't his safety net anymore. I started making calls. To my university's financial aid office, to legal aid services, to my grandmother who had always been my unwavering supporter when it came to my academic dreams. I didn't tell them everything yet. For now, I was gathering information, assessing my options, formulating a plan. My father's next call came while I was in class. "Hey, Princess, quick question. You wouldn't happen to have any other savings accounts, would you? Just wondering, since you're always so good with money." The casual entitlement in his voice made my blood boil, but I forced myself to keep my tone light. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason, just thinking about your future. You know how dads are." Thinking about my future, like he had when he drained my college fund. Like he had when he tried to discourage me from studying abroad, claiming I was abandoning my family obligations. "Sorry, Dad, in class now, talk later." I hung up and immediately opened my laptop, adding another item to my growing list. Close any remaining accounts he might know about, transfer everything to a different bank. That evening, I received an email from my grandmother. "Called your father today. He seemed nervous when I asked about your college fund. Is everything okay?" I smiled, picturing his discomfort. He had always been afraid of my grandmother, the only person who had ever successfully held him accountable. "Can we talk?" I wrote back. "There's something you should know." Her response was immediate and fierce. After hearing the full story, she called an emergency family meeting, without my father present. "That man she fumed over our video call, my mother and aunt sitting beside her, has gone too far this time. Stealing from his own daughter." I watched their faces as I laid out the evidence, the bank statements, the text messages, the casual way he had dismissed my future. My mother's hands trembled as she read his messages. "I had no idea," she whispered. "He told me you decided to take a break from school, that you were thinking about moving back home." Of course he had. My father had always been a master at spinning narratives to suit his needs. How many times had he twisted my achievements to make them about him? How often had he taken credit for my success, while secretly undermining it? "I've been documenting everything," I told them. "Every withdrawal, every message, every call. I'm not letting him get away with this." My aunt, a lawyer, leaned forward. "The account issue is tricky since he was a co-signer, but there might be other angles we can pursue. Has he made any promises in writing about repaying the money?" I pulled up more screenshots, emails where he acknowledged that the money was for my education, texts where he casually mentioned paying me back someday. "Perfect," my aunt said. "Not legally binding, but excellent leverage for what comes next." "What comes next?" my mother asked. "Next," my grandmother declared, "we make Gregory realize exactly what he's done and whom he's done it to." The plan came together quickly. My grandmother would confront him first, making it clear that the family was fully aware of his actions. My aunt would draft a formal demand letter outlining his options for making restitution, and my mother, after years of hesitation, would finally file for divorce. "He's always underestimated you," my grandmother said. "Treated you like an extension of himself instead of your own person. It's time to show him who you really are." That night, my father called again. "Your grandmother seemed upset today," he said carefully. "You didn't tell her anything, did you?" "About what, Dad?" I asked, voice steady. "The college fund you stole? The future you tried to derail? Or just your general belief that your daughter's education means nothing compared to your bar tab?" Silence on his end, then, "Now, Princess. Don't call me Princess. Don't call me at all. Come on, there's no need to... Everything goes through Aunt Sarah from now on." "Sarah, why would your aunt need to be involved?" "Because she's a lawyer, Dad. And for the first time in my life, I had the upper hand. You're about to need one too." My father's reaction was predictable. First denial, then anger, and finally desperate attempts at manipulation. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he texted. "It was just money. Family is more important than money." I forwarded each message to my aunt without responding, let him dig his hole deeper. His next move was to show up unannounced at my grandmother's house, where I had been staying until my return flight to London. He barely made it to the front porch before she blocked his path, her voice sharp and unwavering. "How dare you?" she demanded, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Stealing your daughter's college fund? Have you no shame?" "Mother, please," he tried, his voice dropping in an attempt to regain control. "This is a family matter." "Exactly. And you've betrayed your family. Now leave before I call the police." He had no choice but to turn away, but his text messages continued. Your grandmother's turned you against me. I'm your father, you owe me respect. After everything I've done for you. I thought about everything he had actually done for me. How he had tried to discourage my academic success. How he had borrowed from my childhood savings. How he had treated my achievements as something he could cash in on whenever he needed. Then came the next blow, my aunt's demand letter, delivered to his house via certified mail. Inside was a meticulously detailed accounting of every penny he had taken, alongside formal repayment options. He called me livid. You can't sue your own father. Watch me, I replied, then hung up. The family fallout was immediate and spectacular. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years called to express their disgust. Even his own sister, my Aunt Patricia, reached out, sharing stories of how he had stolen money from her children's birthday cards. He's always been like this, she said bitterly, taking what isn't his and expecting everyone to forgive him because he's family. My mother finally filed for divorce, citing financial infidelity among other grievances. During their first hearing, the full extent of his theft came to light. You emptied your daughter's college fund to pay gambling debts, the judge asked incredulously. I was going to pay it back, my father protested weakly. With what money? The judge pressed. According to these statements, you haven't held a steady job in 3 years. His carefully constructed facade, the fun-loving, generous father, was unraveling. Every attempt he made to defend himself only revealed more of his true nature. Meanwhile, the university's financial aid office proved more helpful than I had expected. Once they understood my situation, they assisted me in securing emergency funding and setting up a manageable payment plan for my final year. My grandmother insisted on covering whatever was left. Unlike your father, she said firmly, I understand the value of education and of keeping promises. My father's response to the demand letter was, predictably, to claim poverty. He insisted he had no means to repay what he had stolen. Then my aunt discovered his recent purchases, a new car, luxury vacation photos posted on social media, the country club membership he had somehow managed to maintain. He's not broke, she explained. He's just good at hiding assets, but not good enough. His text messages grew increasingly desperate. You're ruining my life, my own daughter turning against me like this. I raised you better than this. Each message stripped away his carefully crafted persona. The loving father act was gone, replaced by the manipulator beneath. The final straw came when he attempted to turn my younger cousins against me, spinning a tale of how I was trying to bankrupt him out of spite. Instead, they sent me screenshots of his messages. Remember when Uncle Greg told us our college funds were safe with him? My cousin Jake wrote. Guess we know what that meant. With my aunt's help, they secured their own accounts before he could strike again. One by one, his web of financial deceit was being exposed. And during my mother's divorce proceedings, even more revelations surfaced. He had been hiding money for years, taking out loans in my mother's name, even attempting to remortgage their house without her knowledge. He's been treating the whole family like his personal ATM, my mother realized. And the worst part was that we had all just kept making excuses for him. Determined to end the cycle, my grandmother arranged another family meeting, again without him present. This time, relatives came forward, one after another, sharing stories of loans never repaid, promises broken, trust betrayed. Each revelation only strengthened our collective resolve to finally hold him accountable. He's always counted on family loyalty to shield him from consequences, my aunt observed. Time to show him that loyalty goes both ways. The consequences hit my father like dominoes falling. First, my mother's divorce attorney uncovered his hidden accounts, leading to a much larger settlement than he had anticipated. Then, my aunt's legal pressure forced him to agree to a repayment plan for my stolen college funds, with interest. His carefully crafted facade as the fun-loving, generous dad completely collapsed when the family discovered he had been borrowing money from elderly relatives, promising returns on fake investments that never materialized. A regular Ponzi scheme, my aunt muttered, adding yet another damning discovery to her growing file on him. His text messages to me shifted from angry rants to desperate pleas. I'm still your father, we can work this out. Everyone makes mistakes. Why can't you forgive me? What will people think of you? Treating your dad this way? I thought about all the times he had used guilt to control me, how he had twisted every situation to make himself the victim. But not anymore. Through my grandmother's connections, I secured a part-time job that allowed me to complete my degree while working. My professors, understanding my situation, helped me arrange a flexible schedule. Every small victory felt like another step further from his influence. The family's support surprised me. Cousins shared their own stories of his financial manipulation. Aunts and uncles who had once enabled his behavior now stood firmly against him. Even distant relatives reached out to offer words of encouragement. Your father called, my grandmother told me one evening. Tried to convince me to talk you out of the repayment plan. Said it was destroying the family. And what did you tell him? I asked. That he'd destroyed it himself when he stole from his own daughter. His last desperate attempt at manipulation came when he showed up at my graduation, uninvited, unwelcome, but determined to play the role of the proud father. That's my girl, he announced loudly to anyone who would listen. Gets her business sense from me. Before he could cause a scene, my Aunt Sarah had him escorted out. Your success belongs to you, she told me afterward. He doesn't get to claim credit for what he tried to prevent. A year after the confrontation over my stolen college fund, my father's carefully constructed world had completely unraveled. The divorce had exposed his financial schemes to everyone. Former friends who had invested in his shady business ventures were demanding answers. Relatives he had borrowed from were taking legal action. My graduation party, hosted by my grandmother, became more than a celebration of my academic achievement. It was a celebration of my independence. Friends and family gathered to support me, many sharing their own stories of standing up to manipulative parents. Your father called me yesterday, my mother said during the party. Wanted to know if I'd talk to you about dropping the repayment plan. Said he's learned his lesson. Has he? I asked, thinking of his latest social media posts, still showing him living beyond his means, still pretending everything was fine. My mother sighed. No! He's learned he can't manipulate you anymore. That's not the same thing. The repayment plan my aunt had arranged was strict. Monthly payments directly from his paycheck, no excuses, no delays. He had finally been forced to get a real job when his usual schemes dried up. His old lifestyle, impossible to maintain now. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. Now that no one would lend him money, he resorted to complaints. It's not fair, he whined in his last email. I'm your father, you're supposed to love me unconditionally. Love isn't a blank check, I replied. That was my final direct communication with him. The conditions are what happen when you break trust. Meanwhile, my career was taking off. I had secured a position at a top firm in London, my degree and sheer determination opening doors I had once thought closed. Each success felt even sweeter knowing I had earned it entirely on my own terms. My grandmother had become my strongest ally. Her fierce protection was a stark contrast to my father's self-serving version of love. He called again, she told me over Sunday dinner. Wanted to know if you'd gotten that job in London. Said he'd love to visit once you're settled. To visit or to ask for money, I asked, already knowing the answer. Both, probably, she admitted. I told him you're done funding his lifestyle. The family dynamics had shifted permanently. Relatives who once enabled his behavior now shared warnings about his latest schemes. His sister, my Aunt Patricia, had even started a family group chat specifically to track his manipulation attempts. He tried to convince my son to co-sign a car loan today, she reported one morning. Told him it would help build his credit. Sound familiar? It did. He had used the same tactic on me at 18, attempting to saddle me with debt before I had even started college. Back then, my grandmother had intercepted the paperwork and warned me about predatory practices, including those that came from family members. Now, as I watched his world shrink while mine expanded, I didn't feel victorious. I felt validated. My mother, now happily remarried, put it best. He thought taking your money would keep you dependent on him. Instead, it set you free. She was right. Every attempt he had made to hold me back had only pushed me forward. His greatest punishment wasn't the repayment plan or the family's disapproval. It was watching me succeed without him, beyond him, despite him. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that trust is not something to be given blindly, not even to family. Love should never be an excuse for exploitation, and loyalty should not mean tolerating betrayal. For a long time, I believed that family bonds were unbreakable, that no matter what happened, we had an obligation to forgive, to forget, to make excuses. But the truth is, family is not defined by blood alone. It is defined by respect, by mutual care, by the ability to lift each other up, not tear each other down. My father thought he could manipulate me forever, that I would always be the safety net he could fall back on. But what he failed to realize is that adversity does not break strong people, it forges them. I am not bitter, I am not resentful. If anything, I am grateful, because his betrayal forced me to stand on my own, to fight for what I deserved, to prove, above all, to myself, that I am capable, independent, and unstoppable. So, to anyone out there who has been underestimated, who has been manipulated, who has been told they are nothing without someone else, listen to me. You are enough. You are stronger than you know. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is not anger or confrontation. It is simply living well, thriving, and becoming everything they said you couldn't be. Your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it. Your success is not theirs to claim. And most importantly, your future is yours alone to build. On your own terms, without permission, without apology. Never let anyone convince you that you are powerless, because the moment you stop believing their lies is the moment you reclaim your power. Heard mom's visiting, the flat must be cramped. I know some great hotels if you need help with the expense. I showed my grandmother the message and we both laughed. The same old tactics, transparent as glass now that I saw them clearly. Should I respond? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She raised her glass with a knowing smile. Darling, your success is all the response he needs. 2 years after the confrontation over my stolen college fund, my father's repayment plan was still in force. Each monthly payment was a tangible reminder of his accountability. He had tried various schemes to reduce or delay the payments, but my aunt's legal oversight remained firm. During a family gathering back home, my cousin Jake shared his own victory. Graduated debt-free, he announced, grinning. My college fund was safe in an account Uncle Greg couldn't touch. Then he laughed. You know what Uncle Greg said when I told him? That I should thank you for overreacting about your fund? Said your dramatic response helped him learn an important lesson. Did he learn, though? I asked, thinking of my father's latest attempts to convince relatives to invest in yet another dubious business venture. He learned not to target family members who have good lawyers, my Aunt Sarah interjected. That's about it. My career continued to flourish. The firm had promoted me to a senior position. My reputation built on the same attention to detail and determination that had helped me overcome my father's betrayal. Then, just before Christmas, his card arrived at my London flat, thick with forced cheerfulness and hints about his financial struggles. Inside, he had written, "Still paying for one mistake. When will you let it go?" I pinned it to my bulletin board, right next to my degree and my latest promotion letter. Reminders that his one mistake had failed to define my future. His signature at the bottom, once a symbol of paternal authority, now looked exactly like what it was. The mark of a man who had bet against his daughter's strength and lost. At my firm's annual charity gala, I was invited to speak about persistence and overcoming obstacles. I never mentioned my father directly, but I told the audience about the moment I learned my college fund was gone. Not as a story of betrayal, but as a lesson in self-reliance. Sometimes, I told them, the people who should support you the most become the obstacles you need to overcome. Their underestimation becomes your motivation. My father saw the speech online. Someone had shared it in the family group chat, the same one he had been excluded from. His response came through my grandmother. She's still angry, using my mistake to get attention? No, my grandmother had replied. She's successful, using her strength to help others. There's a difference. The final payment from my father arrived on a Tuesday. the last installment of the money he had stolen. He had attached a note. "Now can we be family again?" I filed the receipt, along with all my other documentation. The bank statements, the demanding texts, the social media posts where he had tried to rewrite history. Not because I needed them anymore, but as a reminder of how far I had come. Every payment he made, forced by legal pressure rather than paternal responsibility, proved what I had always known. He was capable of doing the right thing. He just never thought he had to. My success had become my shield. The more I achieved, the less power he had over me. The degree he tried to derail now hung proudly on my wall, each accomplishment a testament to his greatest miscalculation, not just stealing my money, but underestimating my resolve. Returning to London marked a new chapter. The firm had offered me more than just a job. It had given me a future I had built despite his attempts to sabotage it. My small flat in the city became a symbol of my independence, paid for with my own earnings, decorated in my own taste, free from any influence he might try to claim. His attempts to maintain contact became increasingly transparent. First came the birthday card, the first he had sent in years. Inside was a carefully worded message about how proud he was of our achievements. "Did you see how he signed it?" my mother asked over the phone. "Love, Dad, your biggest supporter." The audacity of that man. Then came the social media posts. Old family photos, nostalgic captions about how he had always encouraged my dreams. Each post was meticulously curated to paint himself as the devoted father who had sacrificed everything for his daughter's success. When the posts escalated into outright lies, claims that he had personally funded my education, my Aunt Sarah helped me draft a cease and desist letter. "He's trying to rewrite history," she explained. "Make sure there's a paper trail proving otherwise." His response was predictable. More attempts at manipulation. More appeals to family loyalty. More hints about his financial struggles. But his words had lost their power to hurt me. Through family gossip, I learned about his latest schemes. He had started telling people he had connections in London, offering to help their children find opportunities abroad. For a price, of course. Each attempt to profit off my success backfired spectacularly, when people contacted me directly to verify his claims. "Your father says you're hiring at your firm," a family friend wrote. He offered to put in a good word for my daughter, for a small consulting fee, of course. I responded with the truth. "My father has no affiliation with my firm. If he tells you otherwise, he's lying." His latest scheme had failed, and with every passing day, his ability to twist the narrative slipped further from his grasp. He had no connection to my firm, no influence over hiring, and certainly no right to charge fees for false promises. Each response I sent, correcting his lies, felt like another brick in the wall between his deception and my truth. My grandmother visited me in London. It was her first trip abroad at 70. Seeing my life through her eyes, the career I had built, the home I had made, the future I had secured, brought everything full circle. Over dinner at my favorite local pub, she smiled at me and said, "You know what makes me proudest? Not just what you've achieved, but how you achieved it. You didn't let him turn you bitter. You just got stronger." That evening, I received another text from my father.